Welcome to the Matt Phillips Podcast. I am Matt Phillips, your sales leadership coach, mental toughness expert, and founder of Matt Phillips Coaching. We help sales managers and leaders make more money, save time, and become kick-ass leaders of their sales teams. And that's what we're here to talk about on this podcast. We are here to give you the tools and tactics to build a well-oiled sales machine and teach you the mental toughness skills so you can show up confident, focused, emotionally in control, and ready to energize your team. It's time to talk sales leadership and mental toughness. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome back, everyone, to the Matt Phillips Podcast. It is Matt, of course, with you today, and I have a very special guest that I'm excited to introduce you to, and his name is Dan Englander. Now, I'll say hi to Dan here in a minute, but I want to tell you a little bit about his background, where he comes from, and we're going to dive into his story and what he does on a daily basis. And what we're here to talk about is critical to you as a sales leader, just as a leader in general, of how do we kind of cut through the noise that lives in today's environment. But a little bit about Dan, if I could speak. But Dan is the CEO and founder of Sales Schema, a fractional new business team for marketing agencies. And he hosts the Digital Agency Growth Podcast, which I'm so pumped to be a guest on here in just a couple of weeks. So you'll be on the lookout for that, and we'll post with that. But previously, Dan was the first employee and head of new business at IdeaRocket. And before that, an account coordinator at DXagency. He is the author of Mastering Account Management and the B2B Sales Blueprint. And what's really unique about him is he is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Can I call you a master? I'll ask you here in a second, Dan. But dealing with the aches and pains of that, and that is always fascinating to me. So, Dan, so pumped to have you. Thanks for spending time. Welcome to the podcast.
Matt, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
No, this is awesome. And I've got a couple of questions that I always like to start with. One, because we're here to talk about leadership, right? But question I always throw out is, who's one of the best leaders that you've ever had in your life? And what did you learn from that person? What was so unique about the way they led?
Yeah, it's hard to pick just one, but I think if I have to, it's Mike Gansel, who is a long time, kind of like the guy that taught me sales originally in a previous role, and before that, I kind of didn't take ownership over being in sales. I didn't really like the idea of it. I didn't really even realize that I was in sales, and we were, he came in, kind of convinced my boss to hire somebody like that to help us. And he came in and, he was like looking at what we were doing, and we were basically just order takers. We were just sending proposals out into the ether and be like, well, guess they didn't want to buy. And then I still remember, being in one of the first WeWorks in Midtown Manhattan and him saying, guess what, you're salespeople, you might not have planned on this, but this is what you are, and you need to learn how to do it. And, we learned a lot from him, kind of started a company. Can go through that story if it makes sense later. But in the last couple of years, kind of like reunited, and he's been more of a holistic business coach to our team. And, I've probably learned a lot from him, but I think the biggest thing is just the timelessness of the business practices he's teaching. Because, he's in his 70s, created and sold an IT business in the 90s. And a lot of it is just, I see the football behind you. A lot of it is just no trick plays, like just consistent yardage, looking at how you communicate with the team, how you can incrementally perfect the business. What's his name? Keith Cunningham, if you know him, has so many great lessons, but one of his things is the idea of ordinary things done well consistently produces extraordinary results. And I think Gansel's like the epitome of that. So I'll go with him for that question. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, it's funny too, because I'm a just big proponent of, everyone's in sales, right? And I grew up, don't judge me with this, but in the accounting world, right? And my debits and credits, and then got out and did operations and business development. And then I've had my business for the past 11 years. And that's something I didn't realize coming up, is that everything is about that experience. Everything is about, like, it's not selling, but it's influence, right? That's the way I look at it. Yeah. I think once you understand that, it's a game changer.
Right, exactly, and influence, communication and all those things. So it's a lot of just, I think I don't go to him for everything. There's inspiration I'm getting from other places, but I think a lot of it's just been avoiding distractions, just doing the work, and not trying to fool yourself into thinking you're going to create some magical solution that nobody else has thought of before. So
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
No, it's perfect. And, I appreciate you sharing that. One other question I had, just again, reading your profile, the jiu-jitsu, what's the biggest learning you've had or currently are still learning as you go through that? Like, what's one thing you learned as you've started that sport?
Oh man, that's so many. I have a great coach now. I've had a lot of different coaches throughout the years. Right now, I train in Manhattan at Henzo's there, which is kind of a prolific gym. And there's a coach named Mike Jaramillo, who's if you know the jiu-jitsu world, there's a famous guy named John Danaher, and it's his first black belt. And he'll always make the point that jiu-jitsu mirrors life, and vice versa. So there's a lot of parallels. I think a lot of it is the sort of idea of relearning things. The humility is really big. The ebbs and flows of it, the fact that like we want life to be this rise, the hockey stick,
Yes.
but really it's a sine wave that hopefully is going up. I think jiu-jitsu mirrors that a lot. As I'm not super old, I'm 35, but as I get older, there's people that are younger and are like in that rapid skill increase phase, and I think that there's this plateau thing that happens where you have to kind of go to your all the cliche stuff, like go into your discomfort zone and so on from there. And it's really it's very eerily similar to owning a business or being a salesperson or whatever it is. Like you have to constantly be doing that. There are these plateaus that suck. There's downswings, especially now with economy, summer, whatever macro excuse you want to make. So anyway, I'm rambling, but those are a few things that come to mind.
Yeah, I obviously with my baseball background, things like that, and I've done, ultra marathons and things of that nature over the years, and I just think it's so fascinating. I've never done jiu-jitsu actually, but it's fascinating when you start different things, just how that it's to your point mirrors life, but it just kind of proves that when you're in a sales role, leadership role, just living life, it's like this is how things go, right? So it's your mindset, your approach to everything it's mirrored in those sports and those experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And you need, I feel like you really need something like that. It doesn't have to be jiu-jitsu. It could be whatever it is for you, but you need some other thing to help you reach baseline, as opposed to just the success of, oh, how many deals did I close last month, or where's the business with revenue wise, or whatever it is. Yeah.
That's so true. What made you get into jiu-jitsu, by the way?
It's funny. I didn't have a crazy origin story. I think I was always partial to it. I'd taken like kind of a goofy intramural MMA class in college, but it was in hindsight irresponsibly taught. Like it was just not taught the right way. And this would have been circa like 2007, 2008. So it was kind of the early days of this stuff, and they didn't really. But I digress.
Yes,
I guess I started training for real like in 2016, and I was just bored. I was like doing yoga and like going to a gym and stuff, and just needed something else. And my friend Jan, who runs the lead generation business as well, was like, "Hey, you should think about jiu-jitsu." And I was like, "I kind of like judo more." And he's like, "Dude, you don't want to be getting thrown under your joints over the next like 10 to 20 years. Like it's great and all, but jiu-jitsu is a better long-term investment." And but I still do a little judo, do a lot more wrestling and jiu-jitsu. So got into it there and kind of fell in love with it.
I love it. Love it. Well, I think it's such an important thing, like just as human beings, that we have some outlet and just different way to challenge us than just the monotony of what we're doing day to day, right? Kind of taking care of yourself. Yeah. So I love that. I love that piece of it, right? And it sounds like you found a really like the right environment for you too, where you just thrive in that environment. And I think that's critical too, right? If you're bored with whatever you're doing, go mix it up. Be curious, find something else along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's especially being physical. And I think it's funny because they talk to like these famous health doctors and people that do research on this stuff. And when you have all the data, it's like really the reason it's not really finding the best physical pastime. It's really just whatever you can have longevity with. So it takes no resistance for me to go train. And I'm sure this is the same for people to get really into weightlifting or baseball or whatever it is. It's really the longevity. And for me personally, like if anybody's listening and they're like, oh, I need to get more active or I need to go to the gym more, I think the hardest thing is the discipline of making yourself do each thing. Like if you go to a gym, you have to get yourself to the gym, then you have to make yourself do all the exercises, then you have to make yourself do all the exercises with the right weight or do this long on a treadmill. I think there's something a lot more powerful about a class situation where you're making friends. And,
Mm.
For me, it's jiu-jitsu. It could be something else for other people, but you pretty much just have to get yourself there, and then everything, you're not going to not do it once you're there. And
Yes.
then that, with that sort of accountability and instructor and everything. So I think that's a better way to start if you haven't started yet.
That's true. No, I did CrossFit for years, and that was the same thing, Dan.
Yeah.
That was the environment was perfect for me. It was like a team in baseball, but just obviously not a baseball team.
Yeah.
But again, it's that encouragement, motivation, accountability. And the best part was when I showed up, I didn't have to think about what I was doing. It was just, here's the workout, go do it. And I just have to worry about, I guess, the weight. And I'm like, okay, well, then off we go. So,
and Matt, sorry, I don't know this, but what was your baseball background? Can you talk about that for just, sorry to flip the interview on you. Just curious though.
No, I know. No worries at all. So I played, obviously high school baseball. Then I played Division I college baseball at Creighton in Omaha. And then I played professionally overseas. So I moved over to Europe to play for a little while.
Cool.
So kind of have that path. And now part of what I get to do is a very small percentage of my business, about 10%, is working with athletes. So professional athletes and, high school athletes, things like that. So
that sounds really compelling.
Yeah, the active piece is huge for me. And, it's such a mirror into owning a business, working with a bunch of salespeople. It's that competitiveness, just taking care of yourself, of staying humble, grounded, consistent. I think that's the biggest thing for me of working out, and why I try to do that in my life as well.
Yeah. It becomes a must, and it becomes like a thing that you feel weird if you don't do it. And it's addictive. Totally. Once you it's no longer the thing of like, I forgot where I read this, but it was something like discipline is the guardrail that keeps you from going off the cliff. It's like, it's great that it's there, but you don't really want to have to rely on that guardrail. It's better just to not drive your car and do it to begin with. So it's not even a discipline thing anymore. You just kind of get addicted to it and you keep doing it,
Yeah, it becomes back normal again.
Yeah.
And so this is like a perfect segue to the sales world specifically, right? Relationship building. And, obviously I've spent extensive time on, your website and learned about your business. And it's fascinating, right? Because when we talk about all these words that we've just discussed in the last few minutes about consistency, and it's coming up with like the ordinary things, like the tried and true kind of methods. And part of that is about relationship building, right? And prospecting. And there's, keeping the pipeline full and making sure you're reaching the right people at the right time and all those sorts of things we know about. And they, if we're not careful, can come with pretty significant challenges. And there's so much that I want to dive into today, and we'll see how much time that we have, and maybe do a part 2 or something like that. Or maybe we'll just obviously connect the interview that we do, and maybe we can continue to talk about it there. But one of the things around relationship building that I think is so important in prospecting is, how do we differentiate ourselves? How do we personalize what we're doing? How do we break through all the noise that we deal with, because there's LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, and then emails that we're reaching out to whether cold or warm prospects, right? And I found it's a constant battle of how do I differentiate myself and not just send a message out, but send the right message out to people. And it's something I always struggle with. And I see a lot of salespeople we work with struggle with. And if they're leading people, it's all over the board of the effectiveness of that. So I want to dive into that with you a little bit and get some thoughts that you have around it, of how do we kind of strike that right balance around that personalization side versus scaling it, and scaling your business and prospecting. How do you think about that? How do you approach that in what you do, Dan?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's so many places to go with it. So first, to kind of diagnose the problem. And I think what a lot of people are experiencing, our main focus is we work with, agencies and B2B service companies, usually reaching out to significantly large organizations, from funded startups to enterprise. So that's our core focus. So exactly how you do this might change depending on your situation. If you're reaching out to dentists or pizza shops, there could be shades of gray, and this could change a little bit. But regardless, I think the same principles apply.
Yeah.
But what happened was, what we hear a lot of is, hey, we used to do outbound and it stopped working, or we used to do this and it doesn't work anymore. And there can be different reasons for it, but the main thing that's happened is everything's gotten a lot more crowded, right? The internet has democratized a lot more areas of business. And basically, if you have an internet connection and a laptop, you can start business that is competitive with a lot of the market. So things got a lot noisier. In addition to that, there's a lot more competition writ large for our attention, as we all know, social media, et cetera. There's just a lot more noise, a lot more crowding. So our whole thing is like, we used to do the cold outreach game. We did it for a long time, and because frankly, it used to work, and it started declining, in performance. And I remember there was one client that was perfectly positioned. They were an agency. They were going after tech. This was like the boom of the tech industry, right? There's, I don't know when this was. This was like definitely pre 2020, probably 2017, 2018 now. Perfectly positioned, and we tried and we knew what we were doing. We could diagnose deliverability. We were setting up these complex funnels, involved LinkedIn and email and this touch point and that touch point, and like the whole, it takes X million touch points to get a meeting, right? We all heard that a million times.
Yes.
And it still wasn't working. And we were like, okay, this isn't working for them. It's not working for others. Like, is there something broken about this sort of approach of like the traditional BDR model of going in cold and doing this sort of thing? So what we did was, okay, we're going to do something that no one else is doing. And we're going to kind of look at data that's inherently scarce, that's harder to come by. And that's not so much the thing that everyone has access to, but looking at a commonality between our client, the seller, and the prospect, the buyer. In this case, they happen to be going after big tech companies. So we said, okay, we're going to look at people that are in the titles they want to reach that worked at a big company. I'm making this up. Let's say it was Oracle, and they've now gone on to a Symantec. And we sent everybody a 2-line email that says, saw you were at Oracle. We've done a lot of work with them. Hope things are going well at Symantec. I think we should probably talk. And that got dozens of meetings. They went on to close significant business and so on. That planted the seed. And then we started evolving it from there into what we call relationship sales at scale, which is looking at these commonalities between buyer and seller. So tactically, we can go really far into a rabbit hole on that, but our hypothesis or our claim, and then I'll shut up, is
this is great. Yeah, keep going.
Is that like right now there's this arms race towards personalization, and there's all these AI tools that are basically doing the same thing, saying I'm going to look at you, I'm going to find data about you, and I'm going to regurgitate it back to you. Hey, Matt, I saw all these things about you. Can we talk? That's okay. That's better than not doing it. But the thing that's even better than that is looking at the things that you have in common between buyer and seller, because that's inherently scarce. And I actually think it's kind of timeless. I talk about this in the book, but we have these kind of circles of influence. There's this idea of Dunbar's number where we have, a tight circle of close friends and family. And it goes out by triples. So we have another circle of people we might invite to a big party or a wedding. We have other people that are acquaintances. But I think it goes on to another layer, which are people that don't know us, but would build a relationship based on a given commonality or circle of influence. So our whole thing is, why not start there? That could be thousands of people, right?
True.
So when we're doing this for clients, what it means is, we're building account lists, we're doing all that good stuff, going ABM, account based. And then from there, we're building distinct campaigns that balance that level of personalization and scale. So it's different for every client, but it might not mean we're contacting thousands of people a week. We might be contacting hundreds, right? And that means we can have an email that for everybody that gets it, they're like, wow, this person actually has this thing in common with me, and I'll talk to them. And I'll say one more thing about that, then I'll pause. Sorry.
True.
The greatest thing about that is a lot of the times what's happening is like, people are just going, you're offending your audience and you don't even know you're doing it. So our whole thing is, even if somebody's not ready to talk, they're at least not mad at it. They're at least not putting us in spam. Because once you go to spam, your deliverability suffers and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how we're thinking about things.
So this is critical, because one of the things, and I think this is the balance, right, of how much time are we as salespeople willing to take to find that personalization. And I think there's a couple things. One is there's a significant difference between regurgitating, like you said, information about like, oh, I saw you went to this school or you worked at this company, done a lot of work. It'd be great to talk. And taking that next level of what's the common connection, right? So I also went to the school, or I know someone who went to the school, or I was reading, going through your website, like I used to play tennis as well, or once you find that out about them. And it's that now we've got a link. And when we get on a call, we might just talk about tennis the whole time, which might be wonderful. And maybe it leads to business, maybe it doesn't, but that's like next level, outreach, right? And research. One of the biggest complaints I hear a lot is, well, I don't have time to do that, because it's about activity and volume, and leaders are tracking, like, Salesforce or whatever CRM people are, and being like, well, your activity is not where it needs to be. What are your thoughts around, like, how can people balance, like, the time it takes, or even the mindset around, like, this is taking a lot of time? How do you look at that and train the clients you work with to be like, okay, we got to look at this differently, perhaps?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, I want to answer an objection that people probably have that I think you kind of mentioned on, and then don't let me forget, and I'll talk about the time and management aspect. So I think the main objection that we get to this is, oh, am I going to have a bunch of polite networking meetings that don't go anywhere, right? And the fact is that is part of doing outbound to some degree, but the fact is you're still going to be talking about your differentiators and what you do, and nobody's going to get on this call without having some sort of business purpose. In most cases, they're not just going to have a networking call with you. If you want to only talk to people that are actively in market in a buying state, then it's very difficult to do that through outbound. And pretty much what you have to do is rely on inbound, i.e. referrals, a Google search ad, or something like that. And that's a very small percentage of the market. So if you're only going to, focus on that part of the market, that's great, but that's probably not going to be sustainable long term. So all we're trying to do with outbound is it's not unlike a landing page. The purpose of a landing page is to get somebody to do one call to action and go on to the next action. With outbound, all we're trying to do is de-risk a call. If you de-risk a call, you have a relationship, then you can be following up with them, being top of mind until they're ready to buy. It's really hard to shortcut that process. That's all we're trying to do is de-risk a call.
True.
At the top of the funnel, the main barrier is not differentiation. It's not selling. It's actually trust. It's like, can I trust this person enough to not waste my time? Have they de-risk a conversation enough? That's all we're trying to do. So I just want to deal with that objection. The second question, which is really good, is I don't have enough time to do this, which is interesting because it's like, it's kind of another way of saying this isn't important enough, right? So when people say I don't have enough time, and we're talking about doing sales prospecting outbound, what that usually means is the alternative is doing nothing and just relying on inbound. And inbound marketing is great. We could do a whole other episode on inbound. We're doing a podcast now that's inbound. But what that usually means is they can do nothing. They can do outbound in the usual haphazard cold outreach way, which is not less work. You're just putting the work in a different place. So instead of front loading the work, you're back loading it. What does that look like? I'm going to go here. I'm going to use this widget, or I'm going to buy a list. The list is probably going to be trash. I don't want to spend time looking at it. And then I'm going to, write out some messages that are just kind of regurgitating copy we already have that mention case studies or collateral. And I'm just going to blast it out to these 1,000 people. Half of them are going to click the spam button, and then I'll be like, oh, why are my campaigns not working? And the open rate's low. What's going on? And then you can spend 6 months trying to fix what happened. That's what happens 99% of the time. So all I'm saying is you're going to do the work regardless, but if you want it to work, you're going to have to front load that work because things have changed, right? It's not about the numbers game. Numbers matter. There is a numbers game dynamic, but it's not just the numbers, right? So what does front loading the work look like? Look, you don't have to do, all the commonalities we do, but what if you were to find, okay, we're going to spend a good amount of time making sure these 1,000 accounts really are in our ICP. We're going to have a part of the email that references those specific accounts. So we're going to have quality control to make sure every account is one that we would want to do business with. On top of that, once we get to the prospect layer, the people, well, we could go after everyone that has the given titles we want to reach. Or what if we were to start with the 2,000 people that are right in Denver, where I am, would they be more likely to talk to me? Probably. Yeah. Why not start there? And then later cross that bridge when you get to it. You want to talk to other people, find a different way in. But like the idea is it's too profitable to not be putting the time in. And this doesn't have to be dozens of hours a week. Like for our clients, we have a done with you model where we're working with clients hands-on. they're usually batching up this work, a few hours at the top of the week or ahead of the next week, looking to contact around 300 people. As few as that, you can contact more. And then from there, if you're contacting 300 people and you're getting a 1% to 2% meeting rate, you're getting a meeting every day, right? And then that's if you have a 10% close rate, you're closing a deal every 2 weeks. And those numbers could change depending on your market and volume, but that's for high ticket usually. So anyway, that's a lot of rambling.
No, I think time's the biggest issue, right? Of where I always say, like, where do you want to spend time now or spend time later, right? You say it a little bit differently. And it's also what you're making me think of is quality over quantity. Not saying you have to sacrifice quantity, but the quality has to come first to give a better chance of success, really.
Yeah. It's one of those things that, and this is something we all do. I do this too, with like this idea of a binary where it's actually a continuum, right? So if you think of like a slider in a video game where you pick a character and you can choose the levels, but you can't have it all. It's finding that fine line. It's kind of finding like where that Goldilocks zone lives for you. Yeah, you could send completely personalized quality emails and we see clients do this that are scared to do outreach at scale, but they end up contacting 5 people a day and then they get busy and then it stops, right? So that's a problem on one hand. On the other hand, going in cold and just trying to play this numbers game and beat people over the head doesn't work either. So what that number looks like for you is going to a little bit depend on your market. But for our clients that, again, are going after high ticket sales, usually complex services, et cetera, we might be contacting like 300 to 1,000 people per week, average. Some of that's follow up. Some of that is automation. It's not always net new. But that's kind of what we're looking at. And then from that, we can get really into the QC with the lists and think creatively about what's going to de-risk that call. Is saying, hey, I'm in Denver. Is that alone enough? No, but this is where the art meets science, right? It's like if I were to say, hey, Matt, I live in Denver. I live in this area. I go to this coffee shop a lot. Maybe I've seen you around. By the way, we've done all this work with sales training organizations like yours, including this one that you might know and that one. I'm hoping to connect and be a resource. Can we find some time to talk? How likely would you be to take that call?
Oh, I'd probably be highly likely, right? Because I'd be local person, met this connection. If I know any of those other elements,
right?
Yeah, it's like 1 or 2 match, and I'm like, okay, this is worth it, and I have a need, right? So,
yeah. And sorry, I'll give you the floor.
Oh, no. Well, I just want all the listeners to pay attention to that, of like, the time you spend now is the critical piece, right? And you could hire a firm like Dan's to help you really vet this whole thing out. If you don't want to, it's like, look for those basic commonalities, like you're saying, Dan. I think that's the critical piece of this whole thing. And it was interesting. You're making me think of I had a guest, this Brittany Hodak, on the podcast yesterday, and I'll go out in a couple of weeks, but she wrote a book called Creating Superfans, which I have, behind me. If you're watching the YouTube version, I'll get out of the way, that yellow book over there. And the way I reached out to her was, hey, your book was recommended to me by my business coach. I've been reading through it, and I just thought I need to reach out and get you on the podcast. And here's a picture of me with a book. So it's literally a selfie of me holding the book, because I bought it on Amazon, reading through it. And, would you be up for being on the podcast? And I kind of did a little personalization, beyond that. And luckily enough, it struck a chord with her, where she happened to be sitting at the airport, read the email, connected, saw the picture, saw her book, and it was just this different thing. So she answered me right away. And we talked about this yesterday on the podcast and I wasn't doing anything, I don't know, it wasn't salesy. It was just like, hey, I think it'd be really fun to talk to this person. And here's a picture of me with your book. Like, I'm not blowing smoke. Like, I actually have your book and I'm reading it. Hey, everyone. Wanted to take a quick break from the podcast to tell you about a new cheat sheet that is available for you. Now, one thing we believe is that if you're going to be the most effective sales leader possible, you have to know your numbers. And there are all sorts of metrics that we can track, that we should track, that sometimes we feel like we should be tracking. And that's why we put together the sales metrics cheat sheet. It is a list of all the metrics that you should consider, ultimately taking that list and boiling it down to the key metrics that will make sure you are staying on track and give you indications when you are off, not only from a sales perspective, but from a leadership perspective as well. Head on over to mattphillipscoaching.com/metrics. Download that cheat sheet today so that you are that leader that knows their numbers inside and out. Now, back to the podcast. And I referenced part of the book because I actually had been reading it. Now, can we chat? And it just somehow struck her that way. To the point, Dan, where now I'm like, geez Louise, like if I want to have others on podcasts, I'm about to read this next book, and I try to read a book before I reach out to people because I don't know, I just want to connect, at least get to know them a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm going to send a picture. I took a selfie right before we got on today, a selfie with this thing, and I'm already starting to craft an email to this individual once I'm down the path a little bit to be like, oh man, I need to talk to you. And here's the book. Here's where I love it. He's a baseball guy, so I'm going to take a picture of like my helmet from college over here, just to be like, I would love to have you on the podcast if you'd be willing. And it's just that, but that takes time, right, Dan? That takes time.
Yeah.
But not as much as people think. Because I was reading the book anyway, and it took me 3 minutes to write the email. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, I think that there's different levels of this, right? So there's going to be the part that's worthy of that bespoke attention that you're never looking to batch or automate or outsource. And then there's going to be a layer below that where it's batched, but the feeling you want to impart to your prospect is it's not. We do have this thing in common, and it does make sense to talk, and everything's honest. Just because you're sending it to a batch of people doesn't mean it's not real. And then you have the base layer of full automation, which is like our newsletter. We have a newsletter that goes out to 4,000 or 5,000 people every week. But we're not trying to fool anybody. It's obvious that it's a newsletter, right? It's got the branding, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the idea. So what we're talking about, what our company focuses on, is that middle level. Like there's a level above that where it's like, you're doing bespoke podcast outreach. You're looking for partners, whatever it is that's like really high leverage, totally worth making bespoke. But that middle level, how do you get that right? And I think most people are getting it wrong, right? Because they're either over automating or they're just not doing it at all, or something broke and they forgot about it. Yeah.
That's a great point. Well, frankly, that's how you and I got connected, was that middle layer.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And
right. Finding those commonalities. And now we're doing like being podcast guests for each other, and off we go. But it was the middle layer. And I think that's a great point. It's something I struggle with, I know, with my business too, of how do you strike that balance, right? Where it's it's easier for me to pop a bunch of cold emails out if I want to through one of the many services that you can, find, or a list you can buy. But I've seen a horrible conversion rate to the point of then I just do nothing, which is not a good alternative.
Right. And I think that part of the problem is outbound has kind of been sold as this put in a token and out come the leads sort of thing. When every other marketing channel, people know that it's hard and that it's complicated, but it's worth, like if I were to do Google ads, like most people now are not just like, I'm going to chuck some money at Google ads and see what happens. They know I got to go find a Google ads guy, et cetera. Same with SEO, with content, whatever it is. But outbound, I think, is become like more like an SEO, and it's still really effective. And I love it, because I think a lot of people have, what do you call it? Stockholm syndrome with tech companies. That may not make sense, but it's this idea that we've sort of been sold this idea that to interact with our market and to talk to our prospects, we need to go pay a tech company money. And I'm not saying not to do that. I'm not saying it's not worth it. It can be highly effective to run Facebook ads or Google ads or whatever. But the idea that that's like the only way, I think, has become really, really a problem, because it's not reliable a lot of the times. It's become people you can get priced out. The company can change their algorithm. There's platform risk. And it just doesn't make sense. Like you should be able to contact your audience. You should be able to own your list and have control over who you talk to. So I'm big on email. It's like, it's anti-fragile. We all hate it. It can be a distraction. It can mess up our lives, but at the end of the day, it's where we go to make plans and do business, right? So we're big fans of email. it hasn't gone anywhere. Yes,
Right.
Google and Microsoft can try to, control it, but they ultimately it has to work, on the idea that you have to contact somebody you don't know, that you can contact one to many and so on. So it's only gotten bigger since the 70s now.
True. True. Well, and so I've got a question on that between email versus like LinkedIn outreach, things like that.
Yeah.
Before we go there, what client story do you have of like just like huge success and like what they saw in shifting this approach? Do you have like one or two clients you could share with everybody listening of just the differences they saw? And not just necessarily in revenue, but I'm also like revenue is great, time saving, great, efficiency, great. There's lots of elements of success, I guess, if you will. But what's a client or two that you could share with us? You don't have to say names or anything, but
yeah, for sure. We've worked with, well over 100 clients since 2014 now. And, usually our clients have a similar background when they come to us. They get most of their business from referrals and personal networks and that kind of thing. Maybe they've tried outbound in the past, hired a company to do it. It hasn't worked. That's probably the case 20 to 30% of the time. I mean, one that comes to mind is we had an agency based in Chicago. They do a lot of research-based work, and then they're doing media, and they're kind of acting as like a boutique agency of record where they do a lot of different things. All their business was from referrals. So from them, we basically started out by saying, okay, well, let's not overthink this. Who's in your backyard? And just sending a very organic, deliberate message based on first finding accounts, then looking at local to the Chicago market, and got them what ended up being like hundreds of meetings. And they, at the time of this recording, are probably about 2 million with us over the course of a couple of years, which is huge for them, because that means that it's not just about the revenue and the leads and all the KPIs. It's really more about like, now you have a repeatable new business process that you can keep running forever, right? You can go find your market, you can run this message to them and so on from there. In the training group we just had a client get a big meeting with Calvin Klein last week through a message that we workshopped together and just kind of went back and forth on. We have another in the staff augmentation space. They're probably coming up on about 1 million with us over the course of about a year. With them, a lot of the times it's not just the basic stuff, like I'm in your backyard. Like you can be so creative with this, and it can kind of become fun. Like where we found an angle where our client's grandmother was the mayor of this town in the Midwest, and then we found prospects kind of adjacent to that town, and then said, "Hey, random, my grandmother was the mayor of this town near you. I thought I'd reach out. It looks like we've done a lot of work in your space, and we should talk." And that worked quite well. So those are like a few things.
Interesting.
It can be anything. It can be, I'm going to a city. I have my partners in this city. And that's just location. I don't want to get hung up on the location aspect.
Right,
Another thing that we've had a lot of success with are targeted referral campaigns, right? Most people just kind of happen into referrals, right, instead of being very deliberate about it and figuring out. The funny thing is all the data is right in front of us. With LinkedIn, it takes some legwork to find it, but if you know the accounts you want to reach, we have a system whereby we're mapping who our clients know already or have first degree connections to, and who they know within those accounts. Now, from there, everyone's like, "Hey, half my connections are fake. I don't know them." That's fine. That's totally part of this, but we can at least map who you're connected with and then who they know within those decision-making roles. And then basically from there, we're getting our clients back in touch with the people they do actually know. And then being able to say, "Hey, like I'm happy to help in any way I can. Saw you might know some people I'm hoping to reach," just being like very direct and honest. And then our clients are basically batching up referrals into those accounts, which brings them in with so much trust. Like you can't fake that. That's a referral is still king, right?
Yes.
So we're just doing it in a deliberate way. So those are some of the things we're working through in the training aspect, and then in the done for you as well. Yeah.
Love it. No, I love that. I think that's such a key component. Referrals, word of mouth, right? It drives my business quite a bit. And I think it's that finding that balance between outbound and then that more referral process, right?
Yeah. And I'll just add real quick, I think referrals are great. The problem is people, they sit on their hands. They, they just hope that they happen, as opposed to being deliberate, like going out and asking for them in areas where it makes sense and so on. Yeah.
Yes. And it's so interesting. When I started this business 11 years ago, right? I tell the story all the time, and people want to help, right? So I come across people and they'd be like, oh, Matt, I'm happy to make introductions for you to help you grow the business, stuff like that. It still continues, right? But I figured out finally, once I understood the brain, that I was doing it all wrong at the start. And what I was doing was saying, oh my gosh, first of all, thank you. That's super helpful. So I can't thank you enough for being willing to make referrals. And I'd be like, if you know anyone who needs leadership coaching, sales coaching, please, send them my way. And they're like, okay, I'm on it. And I always ask people, like, how many referrals do you think I got from that?
0.
Well, 0. It was a giant goose egg.
Yeah.
And the way the brain works, obviously, is the brain's all about energy management, right? So it's what I was asking them was this massive ask without even realizing it, because I was saying, hey, could you go through every person you've ever come in contact with from birth? You also go through all your Facebook friends, all your LinkedIn connections, their connections. And then after you've done all that and Instagram and all this sort of stuff, then can you analyze for each of those people whether they have leadership needs for them or their team. And then I'm exhausted even saying it. And so the brain shuts down. They're like, we're going to do nothing instead of doing something. And so that's why I love the approach you're talking about. It's a targeted, it's that actually the brain has enough energy to process where they say yes and then actually make the referral. And now I'm very clear of like, Dan, I need a referral of, a head of sales for an insurance broker in New York, because I know you're there. And for companies like this, and this. And then right away, your brain's like, I either know somebody or I don't. And then I'll get a referral or I won't. And it's like, but you can handle that. That's that point being, that targeted approach to leverage that referral process and even the outbound stuff, I think that's what I missed for a long time. And I think a lot of people are still missing to this day. So that's such a key point.
Yeah, that's really key. And I would say even a step further, you can first identify the people that are likely to be able to refer you, because you can see who they know within the accounts you want to reach. And then you can ask them for specific names. Like here are 2 or 3 people. And here's an email template you can use to make the introduction, right? It's like now like all the work is removed pretty much. And they might say, I don't know that person or whatever, but you increase your odds of making it happen. So
Absolutely.
I think that's really key. And to this day, like that's still the way most people do it, right? Do you know anyone? It's like, it's impossible.
It's just asking to kill the conversation right there. Like, I'll never talk to that person again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And everybody says the same thing. Yeah, sure. We'll see.
Yeah, sure. Which is great. We all want to help, but it's like, what's the targeted help, right? So I think that's so key. So real quick, and I'll be cognizant of your time here. One thought came up of like, when we reach out to individuals, so you're big on email, all that sort of stuff. What are your thoughts on doing the outreach via like a LinkedIn?
Yeah.
Or versus email? Is it one or the other? Is it both? Where have you seen any difference or even kind of tested that out?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think if we're talking about like the foundation of the house, I think the copy, the strategy, the way in, the people, the specific people you're reaching out to is way more important than the actual channel. The channel does matter. I'm not saying it doesn't, but that's the foundational layer. So we're not like stuck on email. Like if you there's people killing it on LinkedIn. LinkedIn can be effective. I'm not saying anything negative about LinkedIn.
Right.
I think the challenge with it though is there are restrictions. They don't want you doing mass outreach through LinkedIn. They will shut down your account. We haven't seen it happen with any of our clients. I've seen it happen. It's not pretty. That is a thing. It's pretty rare, but it could happen. But the other thing is, aside from that, let's say that doesn't happen and you're like, hey, Dan, we've been doing this for years and there's no issue. The other issue is just converting people from LinkedIn to the calendar can sometimes be harder because there's just a lot more distraction. There's a lot more spam and there's more noise. Email has its own challenges. There's spam there too, right? There's noise. I think the advantage with email is nobody owns it. So we don't have that same platform risk of some company being involved. And it's where it's easier to track. It's easier to kind of see open rates and see how it's going than LinkedIn sometimes. And and it's where we go to make plans and do business. So if we're in our inboxes, we're doing work. We have our calendars there. LinkedIn, maybe we're scanning through our phone, looking at some video or article or whatever. So pros and cons, I would say.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. And I've seen some of those challenges. I've seen benefits from LinkedIn as well.
Yeah.
And
Oh, and phone. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
oh, no, good.
Just to talk about phone real quick. I think phone can be very effective. I think the era of mass cold calling, at least in the big ticket white collar world, is gone away. I don't think that's a good use of time to do cold calling. There could be exceptions. I don't want to say anything's dead. There are people making this work. I think if you're probably going after a more blue collar business, the phone is much bigger. Um, where I think the phone can come into play is if you get people that have responded positively and dropped off. If you get people that are opening but not replying, then that's where if you're ready to invest those resources, you can get somebody to make calls.
Yes.
I think people get too fancy about it, though. I think we've seen a lot more success with the right message to the right people and getting that right than trying to make a very complex funnel with lots of different touch points. I think that the sales world has kind of gotten that wrong with just optimizing for persistence.
Yes.
Persistence matters, but it has diminishing returns when nobody's shown any indication of even reading your message or caring about what you're sending. Hence, front loading the work as opposed to backloading it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I remember in the past too, like people would use the word copy, and I was always like, "What do they mean?" And it's short for copywriting, right? It's the language that you utilize in any method of communication. It's the language that you use to influence people, right? So to make that connection, help them resonate with you, so you can ultimately influence them. And for those of you who don't understand that copy concept, it's just again that languaging pattern, right? Of how do you write it? How do you make that connection? Because people want to work with people who talk like them, act like them, think like them, and obviously who can help them along the way. And it's just that it's back to that what you're talking about, that personalized approach, right? And
exactly.
The way you write it, don't get stuck on it, but the way you write it it's a key element to everything.
Exactly, and I'll just keep on saying things as they come to mind. Another thing is just the understanding of your vertical, right? I think a lot of the times we see people that are like, we've done all this work in this vertical, but there's growth over here, and we just had a great project with this one company, and we want to like blow it up, right? The problem with that is there's a lot of unknown unknowns. There's a lot of things that you don't know about in terms of the culture of that industry, in terms of how you talk. Like, for example, we often are selling to find the financial world, and I have friends that sell cybersecurity to the financial world. Those guys are all about like short one-line emails. Do you need this? Whatever. You can still use some of the same principles, but it's a completely different situation than if you're talking to chief marketing officer at a large consumer packaged goods brand. Like there's just a little variation. There's terms of art. There's all this stuff. So if you're starting fresh with an approach like this, you want to start with the market like the back of your hand, because you're going to have such an advantage there with like the little things that matter. And then I can't tell you how many times I've heard this from prospects. The most common thing we hear is, I never respond to unsolicited outreach. There was something different about your email. I don't know what it was, and I thought I would talk with you. Everybody thinks that like that's a occasional. That's like 80% of the reaction that we get, and that's what it is. It's these little things that combine that show that you're in their world, basically.
Yes. Front loading the work, understanding your vertical, finding the connections, and then creating communication that touches on those points.
Yeah, that basically de-risks the conversation. So a lot of times less is more. Yeah. So I mean, I think the most common copywriting issue we see when we get copy from clients, or we see people that are doing it themselves, it's usually that they're overselling. It's usually that the message is, there's a fat paragraph in the middle that talks about how awesome that they are, and and it's marketing copy. And it could work well on a sales page or on a landing page, but context is important. And when you're in somebody's inbox, here's a good rule of thumb: if you imagine you're at a conference or or whatever, you've had drinks with a prospect or something. If you wouldn't send the email to that person in that situation, don't send it to somebody that you haven't talked with before. That makes sense. That's a good rule.
I like that. I like that rule.
Yeah.
That's a really good perspective right there. Yeah, actually, I'd never walked out to somebody. Now that you and I know each other, and we'll spend more time together, I'd never be like, Dan, I'm a leadership coach and I do one-on-one coaching and keynote speeches and blah, blah, blah. You'd be like, Matt, I'll look at your website for that. Like, let's have a chat. So let's talk normally to each other.
And there is a time and place for that. I'm not saying that the timeless, aspects of marketing, copy and Cialdini and all this stuff, that I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but it comes further down the funnel. Like, you don't even know what their situation is yet. Maybe they have a bleeding neck issue and they want to solve it right then. Maybe they're exploring options. Maybe they have you in mind for something else. Like whatever it is, like, you got to suss that out first, So all you're trying to get is that first conversation with the email. That's it.
So true.
So less is more a lot of the time. Yeah.
Less is, I agree. I had one situation where I got connected into this company, and prior to a meeting with the CEO and COO, I actually recorded a video and said, hey, here's a just overview of my business. So, a little bit more of kind of what we do in my story and how we got here leading up to that meeting. And by the time we got to the meeting, they actually watched the video, which I was shocked at, but they actually watched the video. And now it's just something I've integrated into what I do, because it accelerated our conversation too when we got physically in the room. But that came 3 steps down the line, honestly, before I even sent that video. It was like build that rapport, send the video later on, and then we met. So it's really cool, creative ways too, I think, and just being cognizant of that. How are you moving each step forward?
Yeah, I love that. I think there's a lot of stuff that starts making more sense mid-funnel, like once you've gotten proof of life, basically. Either before or after a book call, et cetera. Yeah. Very
true. Oh, this is awesome. Yeah, I'm envisioning us, I don't know, taking a couple emails, Dan, down the, some other time and saying, okay, let's take this of what this person sent, and if we could change it, this is what we would do. Which is what you do every day. So, and you and your team do every day. But obviously, being aware of time, I want to ask you kind of one last question, because obviously what you do is important, but how can people connect with you and the team over at Sales Schema?
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. Really appreciate it. Best place is just saleschema.com. We're interacting with people there. If you're interested in training and building this in-house, or interested in having us do it, that's probably the best place. Beyond that, I'm just Dan at saleschema.com. I'm on LinkedIn too, so Dan Englander there, and few different options. I'm breaking all the rules by giving people too many calls to action, but there it is.
Connect with me everywhere. No, I love it. And we'll put all your links in the show notes, of course. So please, go check it out. I mean, a couple of words that I just jotted down as you were talking, Dan, today, of, the key one being trust, right? How do we build that trust through the different ways that we reach out to people? How do we de-risk the conversation? Taking a line from that Keith Cunningham, right? Of it's the ordinary things done consistently, and the diligence. Yeah. And I probably butchered that one.
I did too.
Good.
I just re-remembered it. So I was correcting myself. Yeah.
Perfect. But then that, again, we're here to build a repeatable business process, right? And the last thing that I'll leave everybody with is, from a time perspective, right? Either you kind of use your time now or use your time later, right? So just being aware and cognizant of front loading, as Dan said, the time now to just increase the chance of success later, and just being very diligent, intentional with how you're reaching out and the connections you're making with people. So, Dan, thank you so much for being part of the podcast today. I mean, we'll talk again here in a couple of weeks, but I truly appreciate your time.
Likewise, Matt. Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on the Matt Phillips Podcast. If you are like us, we know that you are here to do great things, to become the sales leader that makes things happen and drives big time sales results. We know you have that big vision, and we are here to help get you where you want to go. We're here to help you develop that unstoppable, rock solid leadership skill set, and help you train to master the one true differentiator: mental toughness. We would love to be part of your journey. So if you are ready, head over to mattphillipscoaching.com and check out the ways that we can help. As always, please share this episode and make sure you subscribe by clicking the button below. Thank you again. And now, go crush the day.